Good evening and welcome everyone to tonight's webinar. We will start at 7:30 as planned. While we do wait, I will play a quick video for you on resistance. So please enjoy.
Internal parasites remain one of the biggest animal health concerns for sheep. Resistance to chemical treatment of worms has been a thorn in the side of the sheep industry for many years, and sheep producers recognize this as their biggest health issue. Parasites are considered resistant if they survive exposure to the standard recommended dose of an active, and if this ability to survive is passed on to their offspring. Parasite populations are considered resistant if more than 5% survive exposure to the standard recommended dose of an active or drench efficacy falls below 95%, and if this ability to survive is passed on to their offspring. Drench resistance is present in all parasite populations, and the more we treat with the same chemical, the more we select for these resistant worms. Rapid absorption of these drench actives after treatment leads to maximum or peak concentration in the blood within 24 to 48 hours. Depending on the active and the formulation, the concentration then gradually declines until there is not enough to affect the parasite at all, demonstrated in the graph by the green line. Both potency, the ability to kill, and persistency, or the time the active stays in the animal at a high enough level to kill, this is above the red line, determines the effectiveness of a drench. And the more parasites we remove whilst the active concentration remains above the required level to kill, the slower we'll select for resistance. The period of time when the active no longer controls more than 99% of worms, as shown by the red line, and when no worms are killed, as shown by the green line, is known as the tail, demonstrated by the orange triangles. For some drench actives, this tail period can assist semi-resistant parasites to survive and breed more resistant parasites. For example, this is true for benzimidazoles, known as white drenches. This issue is less relevant for the Mectin drench class. For these drugs, upfront head kill is more important than tail selection. The slight difference shown by the graph in the time the two actives are between the red and green lines is of minimal significance. From the graph, we can also see that the more persistent drench, shown by the aqua line, has a longer tail extending below the green line. Again, this is of no concern because there is no resistance selection by this very low drug concentration. We know that the tail period cannot be important for moxidectin resistance development because we have already seen slower resistance development to tridectin. As producers, we can delay the onset of resistance on our properties by implementing a good quarantine procedure. This is preventing introduction of somebody else's problem. Minimize chemical usage. Use only treatments required to achieve good parasite control. Use combination drenches, where multiple actives are used at the same time. And even though moxidectin has been extensively used in both sheep and cattle populations for nearly 28 years, it is still the active of choice to be combined with new actives to delay the onset of resistance, as described in a very recent publication by Roger Pritchard. Tridectin is the only moxidectin containing three-way combination drench in Australia. A combination drench can also be made by concurrent use of a single active moxidectin product and another active. Refugia management. Always leave a portion of the worm population unexposed. Using non-chemical control, Barbavax, biowormer, and grazing management. Monitoring the effectiveness of chemicals, worm egg counts, worm egg count reduction tests, and avoid using chemicals with less than 98% efficacy on their own. We often hear producers saying that I'm happy with what I'm currently using, but we should not wait until we have a problem. Proactively, when moxidectin still works 100%, you should use tridectin in your program to ensure that it will keep on working. Where moxidectin is less than 98% effective, you should use tridectin to ensure that you remove the resistant population. You most probably need to include one of the new molecules in your program too. Where you're using UGARD and or Winogard in your program, you should be priming the pre-lambing UGARD with tube care or new actives to protect moxidectin on your property every second year. Alternatively, use tridectin as a summer drench. Ask your local Verbeck area sales manager to assist you in developing a sustainable worm management program.
All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 8th and final Target Sheep webinar of 2020, presented by Verbeck. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name's Alex, and I'm the product manager for the sheep parasiticides range at Verbeck, and I'll be your moderator for this evening's event. Tonight, we have the pleasure of welcoming back Dr. Tim Elliott, Dr. George Cox, as well as a special guest, Andrew Glover, who are on board tonight to present on the importance of giving the right summer drench. A bit of housekeeping to get started with. You should be able to hear us, but we cannot hear you. If you are having any technical issues, please call or text the number on your screen, and I'll do my best to help you out. If you do have any questions for our presenters, please type them into the question box provided, and we'll address them at the end of the session. And potential solutions as well. To access these materials, go to the handouts tab on your GoToWebinar panel and double click to download. We are also giving away a Trach in 1 litre pack. At the end of the webinar, there will be a survey that will pop up on your screen. Simply answer the questions in this survey to go on the draw to win. You will be notified via email within 24 hours if you have been successful. All right, so getting back into it. As I said, tonight we are joined by Dr. Tim Elliott. Tim is a researcher with a particular interest in production and animal parasitology and drug resistance. Tim has worked with many pharmaceutical companies, universities, veterinarians, and government departments to help reduce the impact of parasites on animal production. He has experience designing parasite control programs for sheep farmers in the New England region of New South Wales, where drench resistance is highly prevalent. Tim completed his PhD at La Trobe University studying the prevalence of liver fluke in the Gippsland Dairy region of Victoria. Tim's work has been published in internationally renowned journals and has presented his work all across Australia for scientific audiences and farmer groups. Dr. George Cox is an experienced livestock veterinarian, having spent his time in mixed rural practice in clinical product development and evaluation, training, marketing management, and technical services. George is a member of the Sheep, Camelid, and Goat Vet and Australian Cattle Vet interest groups of the AVA and has a keen interest in livestock health and production. We are also joined by Andrew Glover tonight. Andrew Glover is the manager of Mumblebone Merinos in Wellington, New South Wales, running both a commercial and stud operation consisting of 5,500 ewes plus lambs. Andrew completed a Bachelor of Livestock Science at UNE in 2009, before returning back to Cootamundra, where he ran a large-scale sheep contracting business for 9.5 years. Andrew took on the role at Mumblebone in April 2018. Andrew is also a member of the Central West Target Sheep Group. Before I do pass over to Tim to begin tonight's webinar, we do have a few poll questions to go through. These questions will help us get a better understanding of who you are and what information will be most beneficial to you. These poll questions are anonymous, so please be honest with your responses. And I will put those up now for you. So first question. Which state are you from? We'll let that one go for 3, 2, 1. Closing it down now. All right, so we've got 44% from New South Wales or ACT, 22% from Vic and Tas, and 11% across the rest of the states and territories. Next question. Are you a prime lamb or wool producer? And we'll shut that one down in 3, 2, 1. So it's not, we have 29% prime lamb producers, 24% wool, and 47% are a combination of both. And final question before I pass over to Tim, and very topical at the moment as well. Barber's poleworm is a significant problem on my property. Yes, no, or don't know. And we'll close that one in 3, 2, 1. So everyone's pretty certain of their status with barber's pole at the moment. So 35% say yes, it is a significant problem, and 65% are saying no. Great, thanks for your responses, guys. We'll have more poll questions throughout this evening as well. But for now, I will pass over to Tim to get us started tonight. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks very much for that, Alex, and thanks everyone for coming to join us tonight. Just get my slideshow up. Alrighty, so tonight we're going to discuss the summer drench and why it's important in your worm control program, and it's mainly designed for winter rainfall or non-seasonal rainfall areas. So why do we drench sheep? What's the whole point of it? Because we don't do it for fun. I know I don't. The main reason we drench is for profit, and the way we get profit is because we get healthier sheep, we get less deaths, and we grow more wool or we grow more meat. Now, one of the biggest things that people think of with drenches is that it's a cost, but drench is actually an investment, because when you do it correctly, you get more money in return. But when you do it wrong, it can come back and can actually cost you lots of money, and it wastes your time. And being farmers, they're all time poor, and we really got to try and stay on top of all of it. Now, summer drench is one of the best ways for worm controls, because we're really trying to play to the weather of the conditions at the moment or in summer, so that we can knock down the population and then have them not pop up again when we go into the new year. But it's a double-edged sword. Whenever we get this great control where we're using the weather and the hot, dry conditions, it can be great for trying to reduce the population, but it also can be probably one of the biggest ways to select drench on your farm. So we're not doing that high selection pressure for drench resistance. First thing you need to know is what type of worms are on your farm. And with 65% of people saying that barber's pole worm isn't a problem on their farm, it means that people mainly are dealing with small brown stomach worm and black scour worm. And these are your classic scour worms. When we have barber's pole, a lot of time in the areas in southern New South Wales, Victoria, parts of WA, they can be quite sporadic. And when they're sporadic, they're almost more dangerous because people aren't aware that they're around. And one of the best ways you get barber's pole on your farm, if you haven't had it for years and years and years, and you buy some other sheep, and if you don't drench them out correctly with good quarantine, you can bring barber's pole onto your farm. And I've seen that happen in quite a few farms in southern New South Wales. So it's really, really important to know what type of worms that are on your farm, because later on when we go to do the drench selection, you've got to make sure you're tailoring your drench for the type of worm you've got. So the basic life cycle of the worm. So we have an adult parasite sitting in the sheep. It deposits eggs out in the gastrointestinal tract. Those eggs come out in the feces and are deposited onto the grass. In ideal conditions, these eggs can hatch into the infectious L3 stage in 7 days. So 7 days later, there are little larvae sitting on the pasture again. Sheep comes walking past again, chews up that piece of grass that has the larvae in it, swallows it down. That larvae then matures into an adult worm, and 21 days later, that worm is now laying eggs. So you can see the whole life cycle can be done in 28 days. So it can be very, very quick. And that's one of the problems we get with drench resistance, because the life cycle is so quick and it's always happening. we can breed resistance very, very quickly because those eggs are being passed out from the resistant parasites. And this is the stage that we're really trying to get on top of with the summer drench, because we're trying to make sure that we're reducing the pasture stage of the parasite. Now, the summer drench is all about heat, because when you lock up a paddock and you say, I'm going to spell that paddock, it does two things. It lets the pasture grow, and it also lets the parasites that are on that pasture die. And the big thing that kills parasites on the pasture is heat. And as you can see here on this graph with barber's pole, when we have very, very low temperatures, so say here at 10 degrees on the orange line, to knock out 90% of the population, we have to lock a paddock up for nearly 150 days. But if we're getting very, very high temperatures like the blue line here at 35 degrees, we can knock those parasites out in about 45 days, 50 days. So heat is what really kills the parasite, because when it's sitting on the pasture there, it doesn't eat, it doesn't drink, it just has to rely on the energy source that it has and the moisture that is surrounding it. So if the conditions are extremely dry and hot, it desiccates out. And that's why worms weren't that big of an issue last year in the eastern states of Australia on most farms, because we didn't have much pasture because the conditions were so dry. So I thought I'd mix it up a little bit and just show you what we're trying to actually achieve with the summer drench. And here's the rainfall map and the temperature map for Wagga as just an example. But as you can see here, when we look at the rainfall, when we go into the winter months, the rainfall it goes up, and then in the summer months, the rainfall goes down. And then it's the same thing happening with the temperature. Obviously, in the summer months, we're getting hotter and hotter. So we have the perfect condition for parasites not to develop on the pasture, because the moisture is going down and the temperature is going up. And that's the whole point of the summer drench, because if you can knock out the parasites here, it means the sheep aren't picking up any parasites coming through in November, December, across into the late summer, early autumn, because the conditions are too harsh for the parasites to survive on the pasture. However, if you do happen to leave parasites behind that are resistant, they're the ones that you have to deal with over here. So it's all about the contamination and trying to let them die on the pasture. And the way that you look at your parasite burden when your peak worm is, in this situation, it'll pretty much follow the graph here, where we get your higher amounts of worms coming through in your autumn, winter, and then dying off in the spring. And that's purely from the temperatures. It's more favourable for the parasites to be surviving on the pasture. So we're trying to take advantage of the summer drench, and the summer drench is not based on a date. I can't say the 1st of November, the 1st of December, because it's all to do with the conditions when they start to get really hot and dry off. And that can change quite a bit depending on the area that you're in. So one of the things people ask me is, before I do a summer drench, should I do a fecal egg count? And that's where the whole situation of tactical drenching and strategic drenching. Tactical drenching is when you do a fecal egg count, you know that the animals have got a high fecal egg count, they're dealing with an infection, you come in and you drench them. So you're trying to knock out the burden that they have. Strategic drenching is when we're basing it either on a management practice, say pre-lambing or weaning. And the main thing with these guys is this is a high stress situation. It's a high stress for the ewe in the pre-lambing, and it's a high stress for that lamb when you're weaning it. So we've got to try and give those animals the best shot that we can. And with the pre-lammer, you can't go into the animals and start drenching them when they're 4 weeks in lambing, because it'll just be a disaster. So their management, where the summer drench is based purely on that time point of when the conditions are not favourable for the survivability of the parasites on the pasture. Now, as I was saying, we can be selecting a lot for resistance in this situation, because we do leave any resistant worms behind. They're the ones we're going to be dealing with in the autumn. Now, this brings into the topic of refugia. Now, refugia is when you leave a proportion of your sheep on your farm or a proportion of a mob undrenched. So that means that those parasites haven't been exposed to that drench, and they should be carrying more susceptible genes than anything that survives after a drench. One way that you could consider one else resilient, I mean a mob of dry ewes, big fat dry ewes, wethers. Something that you know is going to be able to deal with an infection of a couple hundred eggs per gram or a little bit less, and deal with it over that summer period. But you really must do a fecal egg count first before you make that decision, and I strongly suggest you talk to an advisor first, because if you get this wrong, you can be paying for it for the year or two later on because you'll put all that contamination on. But it's a really good way of trying to keep those susceptible parasites in your population. The other question is, what drench should I use? And first thing is use effective drenches. People say, great, what drench should I use? And it's like, I don't know what works on your farm. And every farm is slightly different. Some farms can use drug X, and while the farm down the road can't use drug X at all because it's resistant, because every farm drenches differently, has different management practices, has different grazing, different nutrition, different management. And the other thing is, should we be using dual, triple, quad actives? And we're starting to say yes, because we need to get as many chemicals coming in trying to target those parasites as we can. So that's why we're really advocating dual and triple actives. The other, and one thing that you should really think about is just because it's got 2 actives doesn't always mean it's dual active. And I'll discuss that a little bit more later on. Concurrent treatments. So concurrent treatments is when you may go down the race and you give them one drug, and then you come back down the race the other way and you give them the different type of drench. Works quite well, and it's a good way to get as many different combinations against those parasites in. Now, the mixing of drenches. That's where we do an on-farm mix where you have drug X and drug Y and you mix them together. We're really discouraging that. The only time it really should be done is when you're dealing with a naphthalphos drench, which is a powder to begin with, and you have to mix it with water or another drench to make it actually go through a drench gun so you can drench the animals. But 2 liquid drenches, I really discourage any sort of mixing on farm, because the pharmaceutical companies like Verbac pay scientists a lot of good money to actually make these chemicals hang out in drenches. And if you mix them all together, you can't guarantee they're going to work what they should. With that one, I'll flick back to Alex and have another poll about summer drenching.
Great, thank you, Tim. The poll is going up now. Do you plan on giving a summer drench this year? We'll close that one in 3, 2, 1. Right. Showing on your screen now. So 23% plan on giving at least 3 actives this year. 36% 2 actives. 18% 1 active. 5% do not plan on giving a summer drench this year, and 18% are unsure. So the vast majority looking to give a summer drench this year, which is fantastic to see. Tim, back to you.
Excellent, thanks for that, Alex. So now we'll just touch on worm resistance, because unfortunately it's one of the devils that we have to deal with, and we've got to try and make sure that we're dealing with it smarter, because at the moment worm resistance is getting quite bad, and we need to take a multi-pronged approach to try and get on top of it. So just looking at some data here that came from 2009, 2012, so 10 years ago now, we look back at older drenches, BZs such as valbocel and roxbendazole, and the proportion of farms that had resistance to that drench of this parasite. So black scale here, small brown stomach worm and barber's pole. Lots and lots of resistance going on, and the same with clear drenches. We had better efficacy against barber's pole with levamisole because it has been quite a strong drug against barber's pole. We roll down to organophosphates, once again works quite well against barber's pole. And we roll down to our amectins. First lot was the ivermectins, then avermectin, then moxidectin. And as you can see, the newer the generation of mectin, the higher efficacy we get. Then we roll down into combinations where we're using multiple broad spectrum actives at the same time. And as you can see, the numbers drop down a lot. So what this is showing is the more ways we can try and hit these parasites with different broad spectrum active drenches, the better we can control the parasites. So that takes us into like our virtual farm, a virtual reseller store. So when you're going in, you're trying to figure out what some to use. The first thing you should be thinking about is, what did I use as my pre-lambing drench? What I use as my weaning drench if you're a breeding farm. So when we roll across here and we look at some of these other drenches, we look at the first drenches, the lamb drenches. Option for a first very much targeted for lamb, and praziquantel only works against tapeworm. And tapeworm is something we're not really interested in when we're looking at a summer drench. So it's only got the levamisole, so it's a single active against your normal nematodes. So we wouldn't really think about that one. Coming across here to Closicare, it's very much a narrow spectrum drench. It only works against barber's pole and liver fluke. So once again, not the best option for what we need to be looking for. We come across to a different type of drench. So here we have Abamect Dual, which has abamectin and clozanil. So it's got a broad spectrum drench here with abamectin and clozanil, which once again only does the barber's pole worm. But against scour worms, this is still only a single active drench, so probably not the best option as a first summer drench. Maybe as a second summer drench when you may get a bit of a barber's pole hit from some summer storms in late December, January, but probably not the best option for your first summer drench. Your Duo cares, once again, two of the older products together, some short withhold periods, but I wouldn't recommend one of these as a first summer drench because it's some of the older products. When we're looking at long-acting drenches, whether they be a product like Tridectomy LA or your Dynamax capsules, they're not designed to be used in summer because the parasite pressure coming into those sheep is actually getting very low because of those bad conditions on the pasture for them of the heat and dry. So they're not a good option to be using as your first summer drench. You should be using long-acting products if they're going to fit into your drench regime when you have the most amount of parasite pressure. So that's where we're looking at these ones along here as some of the better options in regards to actually using as your first summer drench. And it depends on what you did with your weaning drench, and it also depends on the type of sheep you're drenching. Because if you've got some young merino weaners that you're going to hang on to, they're going to be merino ewes, that you're going to be breeders, something like a Zolbex Plus could be quite a good drench to use. We've got two broad spectrum actives here, one of the newer ones with Monty Panel, and it's got quite a long ESI. But if you're going to be hanging on to these ewes, ESI doesn't really worry you. However, if you've got some crossbred lambs that you're looking to turn off in a month, 6 weeks, it's probably not the best option to be coming in with this type of drench. You could be looking at one of the newer actives again, where we have StarTech with abamectin and duraquantel. So we have the duraquantel, which is one of the newer chemicals, with a 14-day meat withhold and an ESI of 28. So sort of that middle ground gives you a sort of bit of leeway. But if you've got some animals that may be going off pretty soon, that's where something like a tridectomy could be coming in quite well, because you've only got a 7-day meat withhold and a 17-day ESI. Plus you're using the moxidectin, which has got the stronger efficacy than the abamectin contained in the other products. We could come across and look at a Q drench. So very similar, we have abamectin, but this time we got albendazole and levamisole. So it's actually a 4-way drench, but it's only a 4-way drench against barber's pole worm, because here we have clozanil again, and that's only working against barber's pole. So if you don't have barber's pole on your farm, it's a 3-way combination drench. 28-day meat withhold and no ESI. So it's in that middle ground again. But whenever you're planning to go into the store and buy your first summer drench, I'd really recommend having a look back at your records. What did you use the last couple of times? What did you use for your last summer drench? And then going in and having a talk to your store or your Vervac rep. On that one, I'll flick back to Alex for a Fecal RT and a Fec poll.
We'll close that one in 3, 2, 1. Thank you, everyone. Results on your screen now. So 35% have conducted an FECRT in the last year, 13% have in the last 3 years, 17% have conducted one before, and 30% have not conducted one previously. Thank you, guys. Tim, hopefully we can hear you now.
Yeah, that's some really good data here and there that quite a few people have been doing some FECRTs, because having FECRT data really gives you a good building block on building any sort of parasite control program. So if you've done the summer drench, how are you going to find out whether it works? So one way you can always look at it is, if you're not too sure, you've never done a fecal egg count reduction test, is to do the drench check. So 14 days after you've gone out and done your first summer drench, select the mob of sheep that's probably the most susceptible, so weaners, lambs, young ewes, and collect some samples from them 14 days later. And what does this mean? So you get your fecal egg count back. Does it come back negative with no worms in it at all? Fantastic. It looks like you're on a good wicket. But if it comes back with some worms, you may have a problem, because if you come back with, say, 100 eggs per gram, what does it mean? And it means that your drench didn't clean all your worms out, but how many you left behind is a bit hard to say. The only way you could really know is by knowing what the egg count was at the start. If you had an egg count of 1,000 at the start, and now you got 100, it means you had 90% of efficacy. If you only had an egg count of 200, now you got 100, it means it was only 50% effective. So if you do plan on doing a drench check, you could always grab some fecal samples on the day that you drench. The way I like to think of it is, you can't visually tell when a drench stops working on your farm. It happens very slowly, and you just don't get the visual sign. So I like to use the analogy of, if you're going out and spraying a paddock with Roundup to knock out some weeds, because you're going to sow your cereal crop or some pasture, you come in with your Roundup, and then 3 weeks later you come back and you can see 30% of the grass is still sitting there green and happy. You wouldn't be very happy, because you can tell that it didn't work. You'd go back and you're trying to figure out what went wrong. Did I use harsh water? Was the chemical out of date? Was the boom spray not set up correctly? But you get these visual indicators. But with drenches, we don't get this luxury, and that's where fecal egg counts are a must. And what about the second summer drench? So the second summer drench should only be used if you've had some decent rainfall events, because if it's remained very hot and dry, there's probably no need to do a second summer drench. But if you do get some good showers, you might get half an inch or two around Christmas, do a fecal egg count 4 weeks after the rainfall event, and that way you can tell whether that's caused any hatching of larvae on the pasture, which has then gone ahead and produced parasites in your sheep. But also look at your pasture and your paddocks. If the pasture is still looking pretty good, or is it short green, or is it running up to head, is it going green? Because if it's short and green and really just shot up from that pasture, from that rain, that's when they might be coming along and trying to hunt out that green pick, because that's what sheep do, and you may be in a bit of trouble. But if you've still got a lot of ground cover and quite a bit of bulk there, it might not be too bad. Also, look at your grazing management. How long have those sheep been on that same paddock? If you've only just moved those sheep in there a week or so after it's rained, and there's been no sheep in that paddock for the last 2 or 3 months, it's probably a very low chance that they've got worms. But if they've been sitting on the same paddock now for 3 or 4 months, there's a chance they may have it. So you've got to look at all the different aspects. So other considerations when you're trying to control worm, grazing management is probably one of the best ways you can do it. One of the cheapest drenches you can find is a fence. It's expensive at the start, fencing, but we hope fences last for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Because if you can break that life cycle of the parasite on the pasture and let them die there, you're 90% of the way there. Another good way is co-grazing, and cattle are probably your best option for that, because cattle can pick up sheep parasites, but the parasites don't develop in the cow, so don't shed more eggs out the back. And nutrition. Nutrition is key to everything. If you've got very good, healthy ewes, condition score 3, 3.5, big, fat, healthy animals, they're more resilient to getting worms than something that's nutritionally stressed and doing it tough. It's the same as us when we're run down, burning the candle at both ends. Nutrition has been really bad, our diet's rubbish. That's when we get sick. It's the same with the sheep. And the big thing is, watch out when it rains, because if your grass is growing, it means your worms are growing as well. And that's where we've got to start really incorporating fecal egg counts into any sort of worm control program, because it's the only way we can really identify when these parasites are popping up in our sheep. With that one, I will flick back to Alex now. Thanks everyone for listening.
Great, thank you, Tim. Before we pass on to Andrew to talk a bit about his operation, we do have one more poll question this evening, so I'll pop that up now for you all. Do you do regular worm egg counts to determine if a second summer drench would be required? Yes, every 4 to 6 weeks, only when I suspect they are wormy, only after summer rain, or greater than 10 mils, or only at pre-lambing. And I'll close that one in 3, 2, 1. So 20% conduct FECs every 4 to 6 weeks. 50% will conduct them when they look wormy. 15% only after summer rain, and 15% only at pre-lambing. Thank you very much, guys, for your responses tonight. I will now pass to Andrew to talk a little bit about his operation and his story. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks, Tim. I'll see if I can get this up. Beauty, can you see my screen?
We can, thank you.
No worries. Thanks, guys. And thanks, Furback, for the opportunity to discuss our operation here. So quickly, I'm Andrew Glover, obviously, and I'm the manager at Mumblebone Merinos. We're obviously a merino stud, selling about 500 rams a year. We manage 4,400 hectares of undulating steep native country on about a 600 mil annual rainfall, which is non-seasonal. Currently running tick over 11,000 head, including plus 250 cattle. We try and run a really rotational grazing system with large mobs, so we have short graze periods and long rests. We find this works pretty well, but we also have a big focus on ecological sustainability. So our program is pretty basic. We have 2 strategic drenches, a pre-lambing and a weaning drench. They are done regardless of the season, and then we regular monitor with fecal egg counts. We don't drench to a calendar, bar those two tests. A perfect example of this was last year. Our ewes were drenched pre-lambing on the 30th of June, and they weren't drenched again until the 10th of March this year, and that was off the back of good rainfall in February. We just started to see a little spike in some worms, so we put a drench in on just to pull them up there, and there was no doubt the hot, dry, drought conditions were to play there. I want my screen switch. Oh, there we go. Righto. So considerations for this year, for this summer, we've already conducted a fecal egg count 2 weeks ago, which indicated a small burden of around 100 to 150 eggs per gram. So we'll test again this week prior to weaning, and if they need a drench, we will. If not, we'll hold off and try and get to shearing or end all the next big rain event, which could possibly be this weekend. The forecast is predicted to be above average, so we will need to ensure we keep on top of and up to date. Barber's pole can be an issue here, not that I've seen it in my short time, but everyone talks about they can sneak up on us, so we don't want to go into the summer period with it too big of a burden, but we don't want to waste that first drench either, is the thinking. And at the moment, we've got large amounts of quality feed, so the sheep are grazing fairly high off the ground. But the change of season, I think, is where we'll see an issue, as Tim touched on before. When they start chasing that green summer feed, that's when I'll start to be concerned that we can be picking them up. And our stock are in exceptional condition. Condition score 3.5 plus, so they're going to be resilient to some form of a burden for a little while yet. Our weaners, however, are of concern, and we've got designated weaning paddocks for those to go into, which should help those guys out. So quickly, why we like tridectin, we've been using tridectin for a couple of years now. First time we used it was a weaner drench, and then this year we used it as a pre-lambing drench. What we really like about it is it's highly potent and persistent for 14 days against Barber's pole and small brown stomach worm. So therefore, it's an ideal first summer drench, although we've used it as a pre-lamber and or a weaning drench. And it's highly effective. We found it highly effective on our farm against our worms. Its short withholding period of 7 days and an ESI of 17 is the shortest that I know of any triple combination. And it's really important when considering selling stock. It just gives us so many more options. And the inclusion of moxidectin, which is the most potent and efficient and effective of all the mectin group, really gives us confidence that's what we should be using. And finally, the Verbac support from the ASMs is great. Programs such as the Target Sheep Group, which we're involved in, and the education we get from the webinars really is vital to improving our knowledge, but also our bottom line. Their support goes further to facilitate with FEC and FERT tests, both of which we do and we will be doing as soon as we get enough worms. And their guidance with Drench Choice, they're not afraid to recommend another product if that's what's best in that situation. So other control methods that we use here on the farm is our grazing management is key. It's a pretty big tool in the toolbox. So we designate weaning paddocks and lambing paddocks, and our highest risk stock go to the cleanest pastures at those pressure times. But the short graze periods followed by long rests can really help reduce paddock burdens, especially through the summertime. And it also helps maintain good plant height to help keep the sheep up off the ground, so they're not picking up those worms off that fresh green pick. And we understand that this doesn't work on some farms, but it doesn't suit all operations, but it works well here. Rotation between drench groups is critical to help reducing the rate of resistance. The use of multi-combination drenches, we don't use any single actives here. And if we do use an LA, long-acting product, whether an LA injection or a capsule, we always use a primer and or a tail cutter just to help reduce those risks. And it's time again now to carry out an FERT to determine our drench resistance status. Hopefully a wet summer will allow us to do this. We tried last year and failed miserably, but I think they all got blown away in the dust, the worms. So anyway, hopefully this year we see some more. And finally, one of our key things that we're looking at is the use of genetics to help breed not only a resistant sheep, but also a sheep that is resilient to be able to withstand a small burden. So we use heavy selection on both health traits and survivability traits. So in particular, the ASBV YFEC, which is yearling FEC, it needs to be negative, but we need to be mindful that we also select a 4 DAG score while we do this, because the two are negatively correlated. And then the selection for Y fat and Y eye muscle depth to build that natural genetic condition score, which is a survivability that I just touched on. It really helps our sheep manage a burden and or any other issues that we run into, whether that's lack of rainfall or a cold, wet winter. And then finally, monitor. It's cheap insurance. Test before and after you drink. I've heard, and I've had plenty of blokes say that it's too dear, too time consuming, but it is the biggest tool in the toolbox. So we use Stockwatch at Temora. They $35 for a mob average test, or $55 for 10 individual tests, which gives you an average and a range. When you start working that back out against a drummer drench and or loss of productivity I think it's an absolute no-brainer that, yeah, while you're out moving those sheep or checking some waters, you just pick some up, put them in the mail and send them on their way. So hopefully that's given you guys a little bit of insight into what we do here, and yeah, go from there. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Andrew. And my favourite slide is up now as well. No, I really appreciate that. Really good insights, and I hope you all got a lot out of that, of both Andrew's presentation and Tim's as well. Yeah, really fantastic presentation, guys. Really appreciate it. If you do have any questions for Tim, Andrew, or George as well, please ask them now in the question box provided. I'll just jump back to me now. So yeah, please ask your questions now for our presenters if you can. Before we jump into questions, we do have a special promotion we are currently running. Verbeck are currently giving away over $68,000 in prizes, including a Tapari HD4 sheep handler brought to you by Tridectomy. To go into the draw to win, simply follow the link on your screen and let us know either how you have used Tridectomy on your property, or if you haven't used it before, how you would use Tridectomy on your property, so everyone can enter there. We also have recently launched a brand new target sheep platform. This platform covers all the key information covered by the webinar series, with videos, articles, product information, and links to all previous webinars and much more. This is available to you all for you all to view now. Simply Google Verbeck Target Sheep or visit the website on your screen. All right, so moving to questions now. All right, so first question. Is there any drench that cannot be used in pregnant ewes?
George, that's probably more up your alley.
Yes, Tim. All the drenches part of the work that you do is safety, and part of that safety work is in pregnant animals. So there is no drench that you cannot use in pregnant animals. You have to be careful with some of them, though. If you look at even your benzimidazoles in late pregnancy can be an issue, and Losantal as well, if you don't stick to the recommended dose rates. But if you stick to the recommended dose rate, it should not be an issue at all.
Great, thank you, George. Next question, should I be concerned about barber's pole worm this year after the severe drought we had?
It really depends on the history on your farm, whether you've had outbreaks before. If you have, yes, definitely I'd be worried about it, because this is ideal conditions for barber's pole. I mean, out the window now, I've got rain coming down, and the last couple week or two, we've had 23, 26 degree days, so it's perfect for them. And also that other big key is if, like a lot of other sheep farmers, your numbers have been down, if you bring other stock in, just remember those other stock could be bringing barber's pole worm with them.
Great, thanks, Tim. Next question, is there a backline drench that can be used on Dorpers?
I missed half of that one, sorry, Alex.
Is there a backline drench that can be used on Dorpers?
The only backline drench that I can think of would be the lousicide combination product Fennec with abamectin in it. But probably as a straight worm drench, I wouldn't recommend that one because it is just a single active mectin. There's nothing else that I know of. George, do you know of any other ones?
I totally agree. There was another abamectin boron, was it Maverick, I think, that was available, but yeah, I definitely would not recommend a single active boron drench with abamectin for any drench.
No, great answers, guys. Thank you. Next question, how much immunity do lambs acquire through ewes, and therefore how necessary is a weaning drench?
The immunity side of it, I don't think, Georgia probably might have a little bit better idea than me, but I don't think the resistance to or immunity to worms comes through from the ewe at all. It's usually more of the clostridial stuff coming through. The immunity to worms comes with time and grazing pressure. So I don't think they really get anything, and that's why we really have to stay on top of our weaners, and it's vital that that weaning drench is given, because they have that very low immunity, and then all of a sudden you're putting that high stress situation of weaning in front of them and then drafting him off, taking away from mum and throwing him in amongst of other lambs and expecting them to grow. George, would you add anything to that one?
Yeah, no, totally agree with that. Yeah, it's very unlikely that you'll get away with not giving a weaning drench.
I mean, Tim, talking about strategic drenches, where would you, I know it's hard to place them, but where would you be weaning? Did you get that?
I missed the last bit of.
I was just asking, in the scheme, looking at strategic drenches, as you previously discussed, where would you put the weaning drench in terms of, I guess, importance for a producer to consider?
Well, I think the weaning drench and the pre-lambing drench are both at the same level of importance. They're both vital. I mean, for two different reasons. Pre-lambing drench is vital because if you have ewes go down with worms a couple of weeks in the lamb, you can't do a single thing about it. And the weaning drench is just because it's such a high stress environment for that poor little sheep to actually be trying to deal with. And when you do get big problems and deaths in sheep, a lot of times it's in your young animals. So I'd say they're both equally as important.
No, great, thanks for that. Hopefully that answers that question. One for our international listeners. Does the worm resistance percentage transverse across all world locations, or is it specific for Australia?
Resistance isn't just for Australia. I mean, New Zealand's got quite bad resistance. I know the UK's got resistance. South Africa's got quite a lot of resistance. I guess the only countries that don't have much resistance to probably the countries that don't drench that much or graze that much. So it's not unique to Australia, but we've just probably unfortunately been on the tip of the spear really in regards to getting resistance against sheep parasites, just because of the conditions that we have in Australia and the sheer number of sheep that we grow and the grazing management.
No, great, thank you, and thanks for joining us from, I think, Portugal there. Fantastic to see the Target Sheep webinar series go so far abroad. Guys, we only have one more question here, so if you do have any more, please get them in now or we will wrap up. So yeah, please ask your questions in the question box now if you have anything for our panel. But final question we have, when would you recommend us using Tridecton LA?
I might flick that one to George, if that's all right, George. I think that's more your one.
You can. If we look at the listeners tonight, most of them are from the winter rainfall in non-seasonal rainfall areas. So you tend to use your long-acting drenches when you have the most worms on pasture, and that'll be during the winter. So your pre-lambing drench before winter would most probably be where you use the LA. If you have a big barber spole outbreak in summer, that is another spot that you can use long-acting drenches as well.
Great, thank you, George. And no more questions have come through, so last chance to get them through now. I will wrap up though. So thank you all for attending tonight. We hope you got a lot out of this session. Thank you, Tim, George, and Andrew for your time this evening. A survey will pop up following this webinar. If you have the time, please take a couple of minutes to complete this survey. We very much appreciate the feedback and have all year. You also must fill this out to be eligible to go into the draw to win the Tridecton 1 litre pack as well. Please keep an eye out for a follow-up email with all the important information from this webinar, including details on the Tridecton competition, links to past webinars and more. And finally, this concludes the Target Sheep webinar series for 2020. Thanks to all of you who have attended throughout the year. We've had a really good response and really good feedback. So We really do appreciate it, especially at this late time on a weeknight. Please stay tuned for more events in 2021. Of course, you can go back and view any of the previous VBAC webinars whenever you like by following the link on your screen. And with that being said, thanks everyone, and enjoy the rest of your week, month, and your year. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Bye.